Gran's house. It was always a treat for the three Levine kids when they got to visit Gran's house. Gran's house was big, with plenty of rooms for hide and seek, and a pond in the garden filled with fish and frogs. For the Levis, who crammed together in a 4-bedroom apartment, Gran's house was a fairy tale castle. It was also a veritable treasure trove of toys, bags of shiny marbles, ebony dominoes stacked neatly in their boxes, stripped hula hoops and skipping ropes, boxes of colored chalk that the children could use to draw on the flagstones around the pond, teddy bears in all shapes and sizes, and a plethora of dolls with curly hair and frilly dresses. Then, there was the box. Some days, it was in the front of the room, proudly displayed on the mantel above the fireplace. Other days, it was in the dining room, hiding among myriad framed photographs, and other days, still, it was upstairs in Gran's bedroom. Sometimes it wasn't on display, but just sitting on the floor, or halfway up the stairs. The youngest child, Vivian, once asked, "Why do you always move the box, Gran?" Something dark filled across Gran's face like a storm cloud blocking out the sun. "I don't. The box has a mind of its own." "You mean it moves by itself?" This wasn't incomprehensible to a 6-year-old. "The box does what it feels like, and I don't interfere," Gran said. Vivian's sisters were more interested in the dolls. They spent hours brushing their hair, rearranging their clothes, but nothing piqued Vivian's curiosity like that box. She was never allowed to touch it, no matter where it moved itself to. Every time they went round, Vivian would look at the box and wonder, what was its secret? Why wasn't she allowed to touch it? Years passed, and visits to Gran's house had become less and less frequent. The girls were growing up. They had their own lives to live. When Vivian was 22, she moved to the heart of London, and that was the last she saw of Gran for a while. She stopped thinking about the box for a long time. Until Gran died. The wake was held in Gran's house. It was the only one big enough to fit everyone in. Gran had made a lot of friends in her lifetime. Vivian felt a sharp pang in her chest when she stepped over the threshold. It has been years since she had been in this house, yet everything looked the same. Older, perhaps. More faded, but still igniting the potent memories of childhood. Everyone wanted to offer platitudes and condolences, but all Vivian wanted was some time alone. It would probably be the last time she was in the house she loved as a child, and she wanted to indulge in a memory lane trip. When the guests congregated at a buffet table, Vivian quietly slipped upstairs. Everything was where she remembered it. The carpet pattern in various purples, the off-white wallpaper and paintings of Gran's old dogs that lined each and every wall. Somehow she found herself in Gran's bedroom. The shelves on the walls were still lined with glassy-eyed dolls, but the curls were now limp, covered with a gray film of dust. And the dressing table, surrounded by the pots of powder and lipstick tubes, was the box. Vivian froze when she saw it. All of her childhood curiosity came flooding back. Gran's mysterious box that everyone had never been allowed to touch. Looking at it now, Vivian didn't even know what fascinated her. It was a plain wooden box, 13 by 6 inches, with a brass catch fastened by a padlock. It was nothing pretty, nothing special. But Vivian could swear it was calling to her. It wasn't such a voice, more a tugging sensation as if invisible hands were trying to pull her towards it. She took a tentative step towards and picked up the box. Suddenly, she felt 6 years old again. Breaking Gran's most stringent rule, she half expected Gran to come in the room and start scolding her. But Gran wasn't here anymore. Vivian made up her mind then and there. She was taking the box. She slipped it into her handbag and didn't think about it again until she got home. It was 10 o'clock by the time Vivian arrived in London. Her flat was located above a butcher's site on the corner. She hated walking past the butcher's during the day when all the slabs of meat were on display, sitting in pools of blood. At least the night they were dark, the meat stored away. Up in the flat, Vivian took the box from her handbag and placed it on a freestanding bookshelf by the side of her bed. She didn't plan it to keep it there permanently, but she was too tired to find a proper home for it now. Kicking off her shoes, she flopped in the bed, slip clip over her in minutes. Vivian dreamed she was standing in the field, waist deep in grass. There was nothing around her but green, an endless countryside. The sun was setting. It looked like a spilled blood on the horizon. Dread pickled upon her spine. There was something wrong with this place. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it. some bone-deep sense of self-prevention that kicked in when the danger was close. She started to run. Somehow she got out of this field. She hadn't run more than a few meters when a hand broke through the ground, stabbing blindly at her ankles. It was a gray-skinned. The yellow fingernails gnarled and broken. Vivian screamed and kicked the hand away, but another punch through the earth. It caught her foot and she pinched forward onto the ground. More decaying hands broke through the ground, fumbling over her body, pinning her down. She found a way and kicked the raft, but the hands were way too strong, and a pair closest to her throat. Vivian tried to scream, but she couldn't even breathe. She snapped awake, clutching at her throat, grasping, her lungs arched as something had really been trying to choke the life out of her. Gran's box was sitting on the nightstand next to the bed. Vivian frowned. She was sure she left it on the bookshelf. Gran had told her that the box had a mind of its own, but that she seemed such nonsense to Vivian now. Besides, that had just been a story for Gran to tell the children. She hadn't actually believed it. How by the time the sun was up, Vivian felt they were silly for allowing a dream to frighten her so much. Dreams were nothing but the working of unconscious mind. True, she hadn't had a nightmare in years, but on the following night of her Gran's funeral, she wasn't hardly going to be dreaming about rainbows and candy canes, and she must have moved the box into her nightstand without realizing it. It was the only explanation still. Vivian felt a twinge of unease when the night fell. The shadows shifting through her flat seemed more menacing now, as in the gray-skinned hands might burst forth at any second. Her nightstand was now empty, except for the lamp. She moved the box into the kitchen. It didn't look quite right there either. The nightmares were worse this time. Instead of grasping hands, whole skeletons climbed out of the lonely field, their eyes empty and blind out, all turned in Vivian's direction. The air was heavy with a stench of blood and meat. The skeletons opened their mouths to speak, but all Vivian could hear was a creaking bone. This was a dream. She had to wake up. Vivian lurked awake, gasping. The blood stench still clung at her nostrils, so strong she could taste it. It was like someone had slaughtered a pig in her flat, and then she could smell everything spilling out of its body. Take me back. The sibilant hiss slithered through her mind. Vivian bit back a scream. Granspark was sitting on the nightstand, angled towards her. The wood walls looked like an eye glaring at her. The first time, Vivian knew she wasn't imagining things. She had left that box in the kitchen. There was no way it could have got here unless... What if Gran would have been right? What if the box did have a mind of its own? All those years Vivian had visited Gran's house and been permitted to touch the box. What if Gran had a good reason for keeping it away from people? The next morning, Vivian took the box and threw it into a bin. It was silly to be frightened by a piece of wood, but every time she looked at it, she got the feeling there was something sinister lurking at the corner of her vision. She was never fast enough to see it, but it was there. A presence. She hoped that with the box out of the house, that would be the last nightmare she'd have, but the third night, they were worse than ever. It was raining in the lonely field, fat red blood drops falling from black clouds. The creaking sounds of skeletons trying to talk scraped against Vivian's ears. In the distance, she could see a house, and she started running towards it. As she drew nearer, she recognized the front door of the lion's head knocker and the flowers overtaken from the windows boxes. It was Gran's house. Take me back. The voice flashed into the air, deeper and angrier than it had ever been the night before. Take me back to my house. Vivian gasped and clutched her chest. It had been something that had hit her with a baseball bat. She fell to her knees, and her lungs constricted. There was a dead weight on her chest, like something was slowly suffocating her. When she opened her eyes, Gran's box was sitting on her chest. Vivian screamed and threw the box across the room. The lid rattled as it hit the floor, and the terrible voice came spilling out, "Take me back!" Gran's house had been in a nightmare. There where the box wanted to be. Vivian grabbed her car keys. She didn't want to touch the box and wrapped it in an old towel. As soon as she was in the car, the smell of blood and meat filled the air. Vivian opened the windows, but it did not make any difference. Gran's house was 3 hours away from London, but Vivian had made it their lesson too, violating every single fleeting law known to mankind. Gran's house had stood dark and empty, the windows like sad eyes. When Vivian lifted the box from the back seat, it seemed to tremble in her hands, like it knew where it was coming from. Vivian didn't have a key, and the box would not fit through the letterbox, but she couldn't explain that to it, so she did the only thing she could think of. She threw the box through the window, and the noise of shattering glass, she thought she heard a deeply satisfying sigh as the box thudded onto the carpet. Vivian got in her car and drove away. She didn't look back. It was years before she was in the area again. Despite everything, she couldn't resist walking past Gran's house again. The flower boxes and the lion's head knockers were gone. The door had been painted red. Vivian's steps slowed as she tried to peer through the window. On a coffee table in the living room was the box. It didn't have a face, but Vivian sensed that it was deeply content. It was back where it belonged. Vivian never visited Grandma's house again.